صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. For the love of Fatima al-Zahra, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. To give our condolences to the Imam of our time on this night of the Arba'een of his grandfather, Allah our salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. When one examines the Holy Quran, a group that they find which has been mentioned time and time again in the book of Allah is that group who is called Banu Israel, or the children of Israel. This word Israel within the Quran occurs in 43 different places. And out of those 43 different places, 41 times it occurs within the phrase Banu Israel. Naturally, the question arises that when the Quran says Israel, who is this word referring to? And we find over here that it mentions that this word was a title for the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, the Prophet Jacob. And what this title means is that this individual had a special watch from Allah who would take care of his affairs, Allah in this manner, in the way a master takes care of the servant who is underneath him. In other words, this term has a similar meaning to the word Abdullah. And in this manner, those who are the offspring of the Prophet Yaqub within the Quran, they are called Banu Israel. The Quran mentions their story in a great amount of depth in a number of different places. For example, the Quran, it mentions about Yusuf, that Yusuf is thrown in the well, and that he is imprisoned, and then after that he becomes the economic minister. After that, the Quran mentions the period of imprisonment that Banu Israel has under Fir'aun and how Musa saves them. The Quran mentions their sins. It mentions them violating the Sabbath. It mentions them killing the Anbiya of Allah. It mentions them worshipping the golden calf. It mentions some of the favors that Allah gave to Bani Israel and the fact that they would receive special food for them. It mentions some of the punishments that they received, that for 40 years they wandered in the desert outside of the Holy Land. And over here, when we look at the Quran and we see so much mention of Banu Israel, the question is that why does Allah mention this group of people? Because there is no group of people within the Quran who has been mentioned more than Banu Israel. And you find that the answer to this is alluded to within the narration. Because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he has a famous narration where he says, "La ya'tiyanna ala ummati ma ata ala bani Israel." That which Banu Israel experienced, my ummah will experience those same things as well. Step by step. Another narration says that my ummah will go through the same things that Banu Israel went through, hand by hand, span by span, arm by arm, to the extent that if there was someone from Banu Israel who felt into the hole of a lizard, someone from my ummah will do the same thing as well. In other words, what this narration mentions, and it alludes to, is that Banu Israel is an archetype for the Muslim Ummah. And that, O Muslims, if you want to learn how to be a nation, and what is important for you to be a nation, then go and look at the story of Banu Israel and avoid the mistakes that they made. Because you will make those same mistakes. Now the mistakes, they may not be in the exact same form. For example, one of the mistakes that Banu Israel made is that they distorted their book. The Quran would say, وَيَكْتُبُونَ الْكِتَابَ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ, that with their own hand, they would write the book. Now, of course, we know that the Quran that we have has not been distorted in terms of its wording. But in terms of its meaning, you find there are many people who interpreted the Quran according to their desires, according towards their wishes. So in this manner, there is a similarity. But in addition to this narration, you find something interesting which the Prophet, he does time and time again in a few different narrations, is that when he wants to explain the status of his Ahl-e-Bait, he does so by referring to individuals who were sent to Banu Israel, or by referring to incidents from amongst Banu Israel. For example, one of the famous narrations that Rasulullah has is Hadith al-Manzila. And within that hadith, as you all know, he says, Ya Ali, anta minni bimanzilati Haruna min Musa, illa annahu la nabiyya ba'di. That, oh Ali, you are to me as Harun was to Musa, except for there will be no prophet after me. You know, an individual who listens to this narration, if he wants to understand the status of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Ahl-e-Bait that Rasulullah is given, it'll require for him to go and study the story of Banu Israel and Musa. And only when he studies that story, he'll understand the status. Then he'll go to the Quran, and he'll see that the Quran mentions the dua of Musa, where he says, Rabbi shrah li sadri, wa yassir li amri, wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli, waj'al li waziran min ahli. That allowed there to be a minister, and the moment he sees the word wazir, he'll recognize Ali is the wazir of Rasulullah, and the way Harun was the wazir of Musa. Or he'll go to another ayat which mentions the children of Israel. And within that ayat, it will say, وَقَالَ مُوسَى لِأَخِيهِ هَارُونَ أُخْلُفْنِي فِي قَوْمِي. That be my Khalifa, be somebody who represents me after I'm gone to Mount Sinai. In this way, they'll understand Ali is the Khalifa of Rasulullah. But amongst those narrations, which refers to Banu Israel, and it mentions Ahl-e-Bait alayhimus salam, is a narration which is not often talked about, but it is a narration which is quoted within the works of the Muslim Shia and non-Shia alike. For example, At-Tabarani, in his Al-Mu'jam, both Saghir and Awsat, he quotes this. Al-Haythami, he quotes this. And within this narration of Rasulullah, he says, إِنَّمَا مَثَلُ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ فِيكُمْ مَثَلُ بَابِ هِتَّةٍ فِي بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلِ مَنْ دَخَلَهُ غُفِرَ لَهُ. That the example of my Ahlul-Bayt amongst you is like the door of Hitta amongst Banu Israel. Whoever entered that door gained the forgiveness of Allah. Now over here, a number of questions they arise, that what is this door of Hitta? And where in the Quran is the story of the door of Hitta mentioned? And over here, when you go to the Quran, you find that in Surah Al-Baqarah, in chapter 2, verses 58 and 59, Allah mentions the story of the door of Hitta. Of course, this word Hitta, it means atonement or repentance. And what this story refers to is that Banu Israel, they spent a period of 40 years in Exodus, meaning they would wander various lands outside of the Holy Land. But then Allah, He gives them a command. He says, now you are allowed to enter into a village over there. And the Quran in chapter 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 58, it says, وَإِذْ قُلْ نَدْخُلُ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ. That you can go, you can enter into the village. فَكُلُوا مِنْهَا حَيْثُ شَئْتُمْ رَغَدًا. And you are allowed to eat whatsoever you want within it. All you have to do though is وَادْخُلُوا الْبَابَ سُجَّدًا وَقُولُوا حِتَّةٌ. But when you enter through the door, prostrate and say Hitta, seek forgiveness. And if you do this, نَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ خَطَايَاكُمْ وَسَنَزِيدُ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That we will forgive your sins, and those amongst you who are righteous, who are muhsin, who are good doers, will increase their hasanat and their goodness. Now this deal is a pretty good deal for what Banu Israel did. The Quran mentions they killed the Anbiya of Allah. They violated the Sabbath, which Allah strictly told them not to do. They worshipped a golden calf after seeing the mu'jizat of Musa. Now after all of those mistakes, Allah is saying that you have one simple task. And that simple task is when you enter the city, prostrate, say Hitta, say I seek forgiveness, and I will forgive your sins. You see, over here from the story, there's a number of interesting points that come up. Now, whether this is Jerusalem, or it's Jericho, or it's another city is a separate point of discussion. Because there are some who said it's Jerusalem, but other Mufassirin, they replied that when you look at the context of this verse is something which is near the life of Musa. Either it is in the life of Musa, or it is after the life of Musa, but he was aware of it. Whereas the city of Bait al-Maqdis was built by whom? It was built by Nabi Sulaiman. But you find, aside from this point, the interesting thing that this verse alludes to is, number one, that when you enter the city, this door of Hitta was seen as a means for the material needs and desires of that ummah to be fulfilled. When you look at the ayat says that when you enter this village, through the door of Hitta, فَقُلُوا مِنْهَا حَيْثُ شِئْتُمْ رَغَدًا, that you are allowed to eat from it wherever so you want. And in this way, this material need was fulfilled by entering the door of Hitta. You know, when Rasulullah says, my Ahl-e-Bait, or like the door of Hitta amongst this ummah, then you find it is pointing to the fact that Ahl-e-Bait are a wasila towards our needs, and it doesn't have to be only spiritual needs as well. That if you have material needs, you find this group is a wasila towards those material needs. You know, many people, they ask the question, that if you as a Muslim, you believe in Tawheed, and you believe in Tawheed to such a level that you say that there is no comparison to Allah, then why is it that you are going to other than Allah? You know, when you look at the Quran, it describes in Surah Al-Zumar, the mindset of the idolaters when they would worship their idols. And the Quran, it condemns their mindset where they would say, مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفًا. That the only reason that we worship these idols is because they bring us closer to Allah. Some people will turn and they will say that when you say that your imams, the Rasulullah, are taking you closer to Allah, what is the difference between this ayat of the Quran, which is condemning the idolaters, and what you are doing over here? The first difference is that ayat, it says ibadah. Ma na'buduhum. Ibadah and tawassul is something else. There is no one who is doing the ibadah of Rasulullah, the ibadah of the A'immah. But in addition to that, you find that when you look in the Quran, there are examples of wasila in the Quran of different types as well. For example, this ayat over here, chapter 2, verses 58 and 59, it is showing that this place, known as the door of Hitta, for Banu Israel was a wasila to the forgiveness of their sins. You know, Banu Israel could have said, oh Allah, the entire land belongs to you. But Allah said, no, if you want forgiveness, you have to go to the door of Hitta to seek forgiveness. You know, furthermore, the Quran shows that there are different types of wasail. For example, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. Wa ma adraka ma laylatul qadr. Laylatul qadri khayrun min alfi shahr. The Quran says the night of Qadr. You cannot comprehend what this night is. This night is better than 1,000 months over here. You know, time for Allah is not time for like you and I, obviously. But Allah is showing that there are certain time periods of the year, there are certain days that facilitate your closeness to Allah. And in the way, the night of Qadr is a wasila. It is a wasila in time towards Allah. That, oh human being, in your spirituality and your journey towards Allah, there are certain time periods we have placed for you. So if we have narrations that, for example, emphasize the ziyarah of the ma'asumin at a particular time, you find the Quran has already shown that time can be a wasila in and of itself. For example, the narration, it mentions the one who does the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein on the 15th of Sha'ban. It's as if he has shaken the hands of 124,000 Anbiya. Or you find ziyarat for the day of Arba'een, the day of Ashura. You find the Quran shows that there are certain times of the year which are special. And in addition to this, when you go to the Quran, you find the Quran shows that certain places are special as well. You know, aside from the example of the door of Hitta, which was special for Banu Israel, one of the places that the Quran shows was special is the maqam of Nabi Ibrahim. You know, there's an ayat of the Quran that says, وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى. That maqam of Nabi Ibrahim, take it as a musalla and a spot of prayer. I can say, oh Allah, the entire earth belongs to you. What difference does it make if I pray in my home or in the masjid or the maqam of Ibrahim or inside of the Kaaba? But you find over here when Allah gives this command in the Quran, He is saying, oh Muslim Ummah, not all places upon this earth are alike. There are certain places upon this earth that if you go to those places, if you do the ibadah of Allah in those places, Allah elevates that ibadah. Such as when you go to the grave site of Imam al-Hussein. And in that regard, the narration, it says, Man zar al-Hussein bishatt al-Furat ka man zar Allah bi arshi. That the one who does the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein, it is as if he has done the ziyarah of Allah. Now what this narration means is that this is a position of tasharruf, it's a position of honor. You know, there was a famous scholar in Najaf by the name of Syed Abdul A'la al-Sabzawari. So they asked Syed Abdul A'la al-Sabzawari that what is the meaning of this narration? That it's as if he has done the ziyarah of Allah. He replied by saying that this is not because of the greatness of the desire of Imam al-Hussein this position is given. But rather this is because of the greatness of the mazur and the one you are visiting. You know, this is that Hussein, as it's mentioned in the Musnad of Ahmad bin Hanbal, that when Rasulullah would be on the minbar and he would come into the mosque, he would fall on the ground. Rasulullah would get off the minbar. He would go and pick up Imam al-Hussein. And later they would say, Ya Rasulullah, what did you do? You came off the minbar. And Rasulullah says, I didn't even realize that I came off the minbar. In other words, when he saw Imam al-Hussein fall, the greatness of Imam al-Hussein is that Khatamun Nabiyyin goes running to Imam al-Hussein. You know, Salat is Ma'raj al-Mu'min. That Salat is the Ma'raj of a believer. And there's no one who prayed Salat like Rasulullah. But when Imam al-Hussein comes on the back of Rasulullah, Rasulullah extends that prostration so he doesn't disturb Imam al-Hussein. You know, another narration had stated that one day Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hassan, they're playing with each other. And as they're playing as children, they're wrestling one another. And Rasulullah at that moment is cheering on Imam al-Hassan. So Janab al-Zahra says, Ya Rasulullah, you are cheering the older, but you are not cheering the younger. Rasulullah says, Jibreel is already cheering for Hussein. You see, when Hussein has been given the status by Rasulullah, we shouldn't be surprised when the narrations emphasize the ziyarah at such a level. Because in his life, Rasulullah emphasized his position in that level. So you find certain places are a means of wasila. And amongst those places is the grave site of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You know, we go to another ayat. Another ayat of the Quran demonstrates that actions can be a wasila to Allah as well. You know, when you look in the Quran and you look in chapter 2, verse 45, Surah Al-Baqarah, over there it says, Ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah, that all human beings seek help if you are believers through prayer and patience. You know, there's no one in the Muslim Ummah who is saying that the Quran says, Iyaka nasta'in, only you we seek help from, but over here it says seek help from salat. At the end of the day, salat is ghayrullah, it's other than Allah. And patience is other than Allah. No one is saying it is a bid'ah to seek help through an action. So you find the Quran shows even actions can be a wasila. You know, that's why in dua at-tawassul, one of the lines we say at the end is وَبِحُبِّكُمْ وَبِقُرْبِكُمْ أَرْجُ نَجَاةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ. That, O Ahl-e-Bait, it is through your love, it is through closeness to you that we seek salvation from Allah. Because this love itself is seen as an action, and that action is a means of wasila towards Allah. There is a difference between our love for Ahl-e-Bait and other types of love. Other types of love, they can stem from passion and desire. I can love a car, I can love a person because of desire and passion. But you find the Quran shows that there is a different type of love as well. And it says, وَإِنَّهُ لَحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ, that mankind has an intense love for goodness. The ayat of the Quran says, Hubbul Khair. That what this means is that we as human beings, we are attracted towards beauty and we are attracted towards perfection. When we look at Muhammad and Ahl-e-Muhammad, that love which stems from Muhammad and Ahl-e-Muhammad is a love that we have seen perfection in the form of insan, that if there is perfection for human beings, it is within these individuals. I'll never forget that poet. There was a Christian poet in Lebanon by the name of Bilal Salama. And he says in a line of poetry about Amir al-Mu'mineen, جَلْجَلَ الْحَقُّ فِي الْمَسِيحِ, that جَلْجَلَ الْحَقُّ فِي الْمَسِيحِ حَتَّى عُدَّ مِنْ فَرْقِ حُبِّهِ عَلَوِيًّا. That truth manifested itself on this Christian to the extent that out of the extremity of his love for Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says that he is Alawi now. أَنَا مَنْ أَعْشِقُ الْعَدْلَ وَالْإِلْهَامَ وَالْخَلْقَ الرَّدِيَّةِ. And the reason I do that is because I am an individual who loves justice and righteous character and somebody who is inspired. And then he says, فَإِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ عَلِيٌّ النَّبِيَّ لَقَدْ كَانَ خُلْقُهُ نَبَوِيًّا. That if Ali himself was not a prophet, then the character of Ali was a prophetic character. In other words, his akhlaq was the akhlaq of the Anbiya. And in that manner, when this individual says he has this love for Ali ibn Abi Talib, it's not from the lens of Islam, but rather it is from the lens that human beings, they appreciate perfection. So over here you find that love itself is substantive and love itself is a reality. And the Quran is showing that actions, they can be a means and a wasila towards Allah. Another ayat of the Quran, it shows that even certain objects, if they have barakah and blessing, they can be a means as well. The word barakah means for something to be firmly embedded. That's why that which has barakah, even though in quantity it may look like anything else, from the material perspective it may look like anything else, but in terms of substance, you find that it's something which is much greater. And in this regard, you find that barakah can be an object as well. When you look in the Quran, you go to chapter 12, verse 93, it's mentioned the story of Yusuf and his brothers. And within the story of Yusuf and his brothers, after the brothers, they meet Yusuf, and Yusuf recognizes them. The brothers, they tell Yusuf that our father has become blind. So you know what Yusuf says? Yusuf does not say that make dua to Allah directly. But what Yusuf says is, اِذْهَبُوا بِقَمِيسِ هَذَا فَأَلْقُوهُ عَلَى وَجْهِ أَبِي يَأْتِ بَصِيرًا. That go with this shirt of mine and place this shirt on the face of my father, the vision of our father will come back. And after that, the Quran says something even stranger. This caravan is departing from Egypt. And you find that Nabi Yaqub is where? He is in Canaan. The Quran says, وَلَمَّا فَصَلَتِ الْإِيرُ, that when the caravan it begins to move, at that point Yaqub, he says that I smell the scent of Yusuf. If you don't think that I am making my same old mistakes. And the brothers who were with Yaqub, some of the brothers, they stayed behind with Yaqub. They said, Tallahi, that by Allah, Inna lafi dalalik al-qadim, you're in making your same old mistakes in the way that you used to love Yusuf to such an extreme level. Again, you're saying that you smell the shirt of Yusuf. My question here is that scent is a physical reality. Why is it that Yaqub smells the scent of the shirt of Yusuf, but the brothers don't smell the scent of the shirt of Yusuf? And the answer here is that Yaqub had ma'rifah of Yusuf. Those individuals who say that we go and we have Khakush Shafa, or we go to the places where Imam al-Hussein is being remembered, but we don't see benefit and they criticize. You find one level of that is that ma'rifah has to be there. And you find in that level, these traditions which mention Khaq al-Shifa, they're not disquoting the Quran or going against the Quran. Because you find that that shirt of Yusuf had nisbah towards the Nabi. You know, there's a very famous scholar by the name of Syed Sharafuddin al-Musavi who wrote a very famous book called Al-Muraja'ah. And this book was a dialogue between Shias and non-Shias, and he presented our side over there. It stated that Syed Sharafuddin al-Musavi, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If I could request you all to move towards the mimbar, the space is running out in the back, with one salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakumullah. For the love of Ahl-e-Bait alayhimus salam, one more salawat as the brothers move closer towards the mimbar. So you find that Sayyid Sharafuddin al-Musavi, it said that he goes towards Saudi, and when he goes to Saudi, he meets with some members of the royal family over there. And one of the questions that one of them asks him is that when you go to Karbala and Najaf and all of these holy sites, why is it that you kiss the shrines? That these shrines, they're made of gold, they're decorated. You know, at the end of the day, why are you kissing these material things? And Sayyid Sharafuddin, he says that one of the things that I did is that I wanted to give a gift. And the gift that I brought was a beautiful Quran. That this Quran was sewed in a beautiful manner. It was a Quran which was very nice and designed. He says later in that gathering, I gifted that Quran. And when I gifted that Quran, that person, he began to kiss the Quran. So Sayyid Sharafuddin, he says that I said, why are you committing bid'ah and innovation by kissing this beautiful Quran? He says, I am not kissing the material on this book. I am not kissing the cover. This isn't my intention. But my intention is what is within the book. And it is to pay respect to this book which is over there. Sayyid Sharafuddin says that when we go to Karbala and Najaf, our intention is not the gold and the material, but our intention is to give respect to those who are buried within the grave. So you find in this reality, that an item can have barakah as well. And in this regard, out of the many ayat of the Quran, one verse which is absolutely clear about the concept of wasila and intermediaries. Because you know, this issue in the world today is the biggest issue in theology oftentimes when it comes to attacking the school of Ahl-e-Bait alayhimus salam, is chapter 5 verse 35. You know, in that ayat Allah, he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullah wattaqu ilayhi al-wasila. That all you who believe, have taqwa and seek an intermediary towards Allah. You know, when you look at this ayat, many of the Salafis like Ibn Taymiyyah and others, they interpret it by saying that what wasila means here is amal salih and righteous action. I say, how many times in the Quran has Allah used the word amal salih? Allah has used this word time and time again in the Quran. If Allah meant that, He could have used this word once again. But rather what wasila means, it literally is something which is a means to an end. And in that regard, if the verse is general, it is unrestricted, the Muslim Ummah needs to go and look at the seerah of Rasulullah, look at the Quran and the Hadith, and to see what forms of wasila were used. You know, one of the issues that is brought up with wasila that people they say that at the end of the day, Allah is the greatest. And anything which is a makhluk, a creation, is lesser than Allah. Why is it that you are going to the lesser to reach the greater? You know, at the end of the day, when you can go to the greatest, go to the greatest. When you look at the seerah of Rasulullah, we acknowledge as Muslims that Rasulullah is the greatest creation of Allah. On the day of Mubahala, when Rasulullah, he comes out, behind him is Fatimatul Zahra, behind her is Amir al-Mu'mineen, holding the hand of Imam al-Hassan, in his arm is Imam al-Hussein. And he says to those Christians, will engage in a mubahala. You know, one of the narrations they say that in Rasulullah, he turns to his Ahl-e-Bait and he says, إِذَا دَعَوْتُ فَأَمِّنُوا, that when I make dua, you say Ameen. I say that as a prophet of Allah, the dua of Rasulullah will already be accepted by Allah. Rasulullah does not need anyone to say Ameen to his dua. But if on the day of Mubahala, Rasulullah, who needs no wasila towards Allah, if he turns to his Ahl-e-Bait and he says, say Ameen after my dua, he is showing his ummah that I, Muhammad, who need no wasila, if I ever have used a wasila within my seerah, it is these 5 individuals. And in this manner, you find that this is a lesson for the entire Muslim ummah upon that day of Mubahala. So you find over here, the first key point of this hadith, that the example of my Ahl-e-Bait is like the door of Hitta, is that the Quran is showing that the door of Hitta was a means to enter that village, whether it is Jericho, whether it is Baytul Maqdis, is not the discussion, and for their material needs to be fulfilled. But here the Quran, it says, وَادْخُلُوا الْبَابَ سُجَّدًا وَقُولُوا حِتَّةٌ نَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ خَطَايَاكُمْ وَسَنَزِيدُ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. But when you come to this door prostrating and say hitta. You know the next ayat, it describes what Banu Israel did. The next ayat that says, فَبَدَّلَ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا قَوْلًا غَيْرَ الَّذِي قِيلَ لَهُمْ. But instead of doing this one simple act, they began to mock Allah, and instead of saying hitta, there are several narrations which mention they would say a word which is similar to hitta, but it's minuscule. For example, one narration says that they would say hinta, which means wheat. Another narration says they would say habba, which means seed. But regardless of that, the point is that they would mock Allah over there. You know, the key thing that this verse is showing over here, and when Rasulullah says, my Ahl-e-Bait are like the door of Hitta, is that there needed to have been adab and etiquette when you come to the door of Hitta. And in the same way, when he says, my Ahl-e-Bait are like the door of Hitta, one needs to understand that adab and etiquette to which you approach Ahl-e-Bait. Because this ayat and this hadith together are alluding to the concept of ziyarah. You know, the concept of ziyarah is something which is unique to the school of Ahl-e-Bait. Yes, there are others, they visit saints, there's no doubt. But ziyarah as a genre of literature is something which has been developed in the school of Ahl-e-Bait like no other place. You know what the beauty of ziyarah is? Ziyarah, each of these ziyarat we have been given by an imam of Ahl-e-Bait. You know, when you come and you listen to the fadail, the musibah of Ahl-e-Bait, usually you listen to it from an orator. But when you see the fadail of Ahl-e-Bait in a ziyarah, it is an imam explaining the position of an imam. And in that regard, you find that this genre is something which is very powerful. You know, one of the impact that ziyarah has, whether we are visiting those lands or whether we are reciting it from afar, is that it has a profound impact on the psyche of a human being. And what I mean by this is that naturally when people, they see someone whom they respect, they act differently. You know, a child, if he's in a hall alone and he's playing, and then his friends, they come, he'll want to be the best at what he does, regardless of what it is. You know, one of the impacts that ziyarah has is that when we go on ziyarah, we say that we are standing at these individuals who are the peak of akhlaq. Where's my akhlaq? And in that manner, it has an impact on the psyche. That when you go to Najaf and you stand at the door of Ali ibn Abi Talib, you say, I am at the door of generosity. Naturally, you find that generosity should come into your life. So you find in this manner, this is one level of ziyarah. But a second level of ziyarah, which is very important, is that ziyarah brings ahsas and realization. You know, there's many individuals, they say that we have listened about Ahl-e-Bait our entire life, But when we went to ziyarah, we recognized and we felt something which we have never felt before. You know, the Quran, when you look at it, it shows that when it comes to belief, there's different levels. For example, Allah says that when a child is born, we have made them to be born with belief within them, that a child is born pure. فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. Allah says, keep yourself on that predisposed nature which I gave you, that nature which is pure. You find this is only one level. At the second level, the Quran shows there are certain individuals that when they develop, rationally in their mind, they think about Allah. You know, يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. The Quran says there's a group of individuals, when it comes to their relationship with Allah, they think about Allah sitting, standing on their sides, and when they think, they say, oh Allah, you have not created this in vain. So you find this is in the mind. It's a rational understanding that you're moving towards. But then the Quran shows that there is another level. And that is the level of realizing something, feeling something to your core, having ihsas as it's stated. You know, the Quran says there's a group of individuals, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ, that when they would hear what was revealed unto the messenger, تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ, that when you look at him, their eyes, they would fill with tears. And one of the goals of us is we need to reach that level where we have ihsas and realization. You know, when you look at many of the different acts of Hajj, many of us throughout our life, we know that shaitan is someone we stay away from. But the moment you go to Hajj and you physically begin to pelt those stones upon the statues, you find that this physical representation is a means to have ihsas. You know, shaitan is something which is abstract. But when you're physically doing this, you find realization it comes. That's why these different things at Hajj have been called sha'air. Sha'air is something which gives shu'ur, realization. In the same way, Imam al-Hussein has his sha'air. And amongst the sha'air of Imam al-Hussein is the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. That this ziyarah, it gives you ahsas to the greatness of Imam al-Hussein. You know, there are so many impacts of ziyarah which are mentioned in the narration. You know, one narration mentions, which I mentioned in the Friday sermon, is that the narrations, they demonstrate that ziyarah is a means of demonstrating our loyalty to Ahl-e-Bait. And ziyarah is a means of identity. One narration, it says, Man zara al-Husayn yawma ashura kaman tashahata bidamihi bayna yaday. The one who does the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Ashura, it's as if he was immersed in his blood in front of Imam al-Hussein. Then what maqam is ziyarat giving to an individual? Another narration says, Man zara al-Husayn yawma ashura wa bata indahu kaman istushhida bayna yaday. That the one who does the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein and he stays by the gravesite of Imam al-Hussein, it's as if he had attained shahadat alongside Imam al-Hussein. That those individuals who gained shahadat alongside Imam al-Hussein were a group who had ma'rifah. And their ma'rifah of the Imam was such an understanding that one narration, which goes to Imam al-Sadiq, it stated that an individual comes to the Imam and he says, أخبرني عن أصحاب الحسين وإقدامهم على الموت. That tell me about the state of the companions of Imam al-Hussein as they were approaching their death. You know what the Imam says? He says, كُشِفَ لَهُمُ الْغِطَاء, that the veils were removed from their eyes حَتَّى رَأَوْا مَنَازِلَهُم مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ, to the extent that they saw their status of paradise in front of Imam al-Hussein. You see, this is how Sayyid al-Shuhada, he lifts people around him. You know, this Imam, in his movement, he exudes spirituality from the beginning to the end. You know, for you and I to say that we are pleased with Allah is something. But after picking up body after body and saying ridan birida wa tasliman li amrik la ma'bud as-siwak, that oh Allah, my contentment is in that where your contentment is. And I submit to your affairs, there is no Lord besides you, as something else. So you find in this matter, ziyarah is a means towards spirituality. A third impact of ziyarah, which we mentioned, is that there is a social function of ziyarah as well. And that social function is that ziyarah serves as a means to spread the message of Imam al-Hussein. You know, it's mentioned in the narrations that the Imam, for example, either Imam Zainul Abidin or Imam al-Baqir, in their wasiyah, they would say, go and hold majalis at Mina. Why? Because that is a spot where people from different parts of the world, they come. You know, right now the ziyarah of Arba'een is going on. There are many individuals who have gone on the ziyarah of Arba'een. They have met believers from other communities. They discussed the issues going on in that communities. They built lifelong bonds. That came through the barakah of the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So you find this function of spreading that message is something which is seen in ziyarah. But without a doubt, one of the key aspects of ziyarah that we also see is that ziyarah plays a key role in establishing our aqaid and our belief. Because when you go to the ziyarah, you find ziyarah, it is showing the status of the imams. Ziyarat is also showing the role and the goal of Imam al-Hussein in Karbala. You know, one of the most famous ziyarat, which you'll recite tomorrow, is Ziyaratul Arba'een. You know, in Ziyaratul Arba'een, there's a phenomenal line. And within that line, it summarizes the entire movement of Imam al-Hussein. And you know how it summarizes it? It says, وَبَدَلَ مُحْجَتَكَ فِيكَ, that, O Imam al-Hussein, you struggled in the way of Allah. But why did you struggle? لِيَسْتَنْقِدَ عِبَادَكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَةِ وَحَيْرَةِ الدَّلَالَةِ. The reason you struggle is to free and to save the servants of Allah from what? From ignorance and from confusion. You know, this is the function that the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein is serving. And when it is serving this function, you find you go with adab, you go with etiquette. In the way the Quran says that when you come to the door of Hitta, you come to the door of Hitta with etiquette, and in that manner Allah will forgive your sins, He will increase you, and you find that this is the Ahl-e-Bait, who are the door of Hitta of this ummah. You know, many people, they ask this question, and it's a common question, that sins which are committed, how is it possible that an act as simple as shedding a tear for Imam al-Hussein leads to the forgiveness of sins? Sins sometimes are major. Sins are something which are egregious. But over here, something as small as a tear for Imam al-Hussein, the narrations they mention, it leads to the forgiveness of sins. I say that when Banu Israel murdered the Anbiya, and they committed acts such as this, Allah didn't say to Banu Israel, go and do sajda for 40 years, or go and fast for 40 years. But Allah said that do one simple act, go to that door, do sajda at that door, and ask for forgiveness, Allah will forgive you. If Allah can forgive sins that big by such a small act as coming to a door and saying one word, Hitta, Ahl-e-Bait or Babul Hitta for the Ummah of Rasulullah. And when it's stated in the narrations that a tear for Sayyid al-Shuhada can lead to the forgiveness of sins, then there should be no doubt in such narrations. And indeed tonight, we've come upon the night which is before the day of Arba'een. This is that night where Ahl-e-Bait are in journey from Sham, and tomorrow upon the day they reach the land of Karbala. You know, yesterday I began to narrate the departure of Ahl-e-Bait from Sham, that Ahl-e-Bait, they said to Yazid that give a house for the women to mourn, for these women have not been able to mourn yet. And oh Yazid, return those items, return those tabarrukat back to us. It's mentioned various items would come back. It's mentioned that a flag would come back and the women, they would remember Aba Fadl Abbas. It's mentioned that a blood-covered shirt would come back. You know what blood-covered shirt this is? This is that shirt that Imam al-Hussein, he began to rip it on the day of Ashura. And they said, oh Hussein, why are you ripping the shirt? The Imam says that they'll loot everything from my body. Maybe if I rip this shirt, they won't loot this shirt from me. But I say, oh Aba Abdullah, that these individuals, they even took that shirt which was upon you. It stated after that, one ring it comes back. You know what ring that was? That was that ring that as they were looting the body of Imam al-Hussein, one man, he says that I went to the body of Hussein and I saw that on the body of Hussein was a ring. When I tried to pull the ring, it wouldn't come off. He says at that moment, I took my dagger and I began to cut the finger of Hussein. You know, it's also mentioned that 2 earrings, they came back. When those earrings, they came, the women, they would look towards the Rabah, but that girl who would wear those earrings was buried in that prison. You find as this is going on, after that it stated that the heads of the Shohada would come, that Layla would take the head of Ali Akbar, and Kulthum would take the head of Abbas. But as all of the heads were coming back, it stated that there were 2 heads, that no woman took those heads. You know what heads those were? Those were the heads of On and Muhammad. You know, when the women of Sham, they noticed that no one is taking those heads, they began to ask a question. And that question was, is that where is the mother of these children? That has their mother passed away? Even the 6-month infant, a lady would hold the head of Ali Asghar. But when it comes to these children, there is no one who is taking their head. And the reply would come, no. Their mother is that lady who cries as she holds the head of her brother Hussein. You know, after that, that moment it comes when Ahl-e-Bait, they begin to go to the land of Karbala. They go to the land of Karbala. And after that, they begin to go towards Medina. You know, when Ahl-e-Bait, they go towards Medina, first they stay outside of the city of Medina. And when they stay outside of the city of Medina, the Imam says to Bashir or Bishar, and he says, oh Bashir, do you recite poetry like your father? Bashir says, yes, I recite poetry. The Imam says, then go and tell the people of Medina that we have come. Bashir, he goes inside Medina, and he says, Ya Ahla Yatrib la muqama lakum biha. فَقُتِلَ الْحُسَيْنِ فَأَدْمُئِ مِذْرَارُ. You know, Bashir, he doesn't say, oh people of Medina. Bashir says, oh people of Yathrib. You know, Yathrib was the name of Medina before Rasulullah. After Rasulullah, it was called Medina. Bashir is saying that after Hussein, don't call this Medina anymore, because this is the grandson of Rasulullah. You know, when this call was made, it stated that various people, they would come. One of the narrations, they say that there was a daughter of Imam al-Hussein by the name of Fatima al-Sughra. That this Fatima, she comes to the caravan and she goes to Sayyidah Zainab And she says, oh my aunt, where is my father? Sayyida Zainab says, oh Fatima, your father has been killed. And then she says, where is my uncle Abbas? She says, oh Fatima, Abbas has been killed. She says, where is my brother Ali Akbar? He says, Ali Akbar has been killed. You know what this Fatima begins to do after that? She begins to go from lady to lady. She goes to Rabab. She goes to Kulthum. It's as if she was looking for something. Sayyida Zainab says, oh Fatima, what are you looking for? She says, I understand my father is no more. I understand my uncle was killed. But where is my brother, the 6-month infant? Sayyida Zainab says, oh Sukhra, a point had come on the day of Ashura. Your father was asking for water. Instead of water, an arrow went down yesterday. After that, that difficult moment it comes when Sayyida Zainab goes to the grave of her grandfather. And she says, Ya Rasulullah, if there were not non-mahram, I would show you those marks upon my arms. Then after that, Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi writes, she goes to the grave of her mother Fatima al-Zahra. And when she comes to the grave of Fatima al-Zahra, she says, oh mother, whenever anyone goes on a journey, they bring something back with them, oh mother. Oh mother, the only thing I have brought is the shirt of Hussein. That blood-covered shirt of Imam al-Hussein. You know what Sayyida Zainab she does? She takes that shirt, she places it on the grave of Fatima al-Zahra. After that, Sayyida Zainab, she returns towards her home. When she returns towards her home, Abdullah, he stands up and he says, oh lady, Zainab isn't here. Why are you entering my house? Sayyida Zainab says, oh Abdullah, do you not recognize Zainab anymore? Then that moment it comes that Sayyida Zainab, she goes to the room of Onan Muhammad. At the end of the day, she has the heart of a mother. She begins to cry. She says, oh On, oh Muhammad, forgive your mother Zainab. She had promised her mother Fatima that if she would cry, it would be over her brother. But you know, there's one more great musibah in Medina, and that is that musibah when al-Baneen, she comes to give her condolences to Sayyida Zainab. You know, when al-Baneen, she comes to Zainab, she begins to say, Wa Husayna. She begins to say, my condolences are for Hussein. Sayyida Zainab, she looks at al-Baneen and she says, oh al-Baneen, wa Abbasa. My condolences for your Abbas, that he held himself and dedicated himself to Hussein. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin.